Ohio, United States, spring, 2003. At first glance, Jessica and Steven Reeves looked like any other young couple in love. Fresh out of high school, with dreams bigger than their small-town lives in Ohio could contain, the two shared a bond that seemed unbreakable. But behind their affectionate smiles and intertwined hands was a secret fantasy, a dangerous one. Jessica was just 19. A small-town girl with a wild spirit and a soft heart, raised on Hollywood movies and late-night crime shows. Her favorite? Bonnie and Clyde. Something about that story, the romance, the rebellion, the thrill, had etched itself into her imagination. Steven, a year older and more grounded, was drawn to Jessica's energy like a moth to flame. And she? She adored him in return, almost to the point of obsession. Their relationship was intense. The kind where every emotion is cranked to 11. The passion, the arguments, the plans for the future. And those plans? They weren't what most young couples dream of. There were no thoughts of college or stable jobs or white picket fences. Jessica and Steven wanted to leave a mark on the world, and they decided the quickest way to do that was to take what wasn't theirs. One evening, after rewatching Bonnie and Clyde for what must have been the 5th time, Jessica turned to Steven and said something that would change their lives forever. What if we actually did it? What if we robbed a bank, for real? At first, Steven laughed it off. But the idea, it lingered, grew roots. And soon, their late-night talks turned into planning sessions. Casual jokes became strategies. And before long, the line between fantasy and reality had completely vanished. By early summer 2003, Jessica and Steven had fully crossed the point of no return. They were no longer just dreaming about the outlaw life. They were planning it down to the last detail. They started small, testing the waters. First, it was shoplifting, petty thefts from local stores. Then it escalated, stolen license plates, scoping out bank branches, watching armored trucks and timing how long it took for cash to be loaded or unloaded. They studied. They researched. They even read FBI case files online, obsessed with how others had gotten caught, and more importantly, how some had managed to get away. It wasn't just recklessness driving them anymore. It was obsession mixed with precision. A dangerous blend. Jessica was the mastermind in spirit. She was fiery, unpredictable, and charismatic enough to manipulate situations to their advantage. Steven, on the other hand, had the quiet composure to balance her impulsiveness. He handled logistics, picked out disguises, plotted escape routes, and studied maps with the seriousness of a soldier going into battle. To outsiders, they seemed like any young couple figuring out life. Jessica worked part-time at a diner, waiting tables, smiling politely at customers while fantasizing about her next target. Steven picked up gigs at construction sites, strong enough to haul heavy equipment and quiet enough that nobody ever asked too many questions. They paid cash. They kept a low profile. And every spare dollar went toward building their toolkit, fake IDs, burner phones, a getaway vehicle they parked 3 towns away under a tarp. Their first real job was in a small bank just off a rural highway outside Akron. It wasn't heavily guarded. No armed security. 1 camera above the front entrance. 2 tellers. 1 manager. They chose it not because of how much money it had, but because it was an easy target. A proving ground. That morning, Jessica braided her hair into a tight bun, threw on a navy blue hoodie, and slipped a cap low over her eyes. Steven wore sunglasses and a cheap suit jacket he'd found at a thrift store. They didn't scream robbers. They looked more like tired commuters. They walked in just before closing, timing it perfectly so there'd be fewer people around. Jessica handed a folded note to the teller. It said only a few words: "Stay calm. Give us the cash. No alarms. We're watching you." Steven kept one hand inside his jacket. He wasn't actually holding a weapon, but the implication was enough. The teller froze for a moment, then slowly complied. No heroics. No screaming. Just fear and silence and the dull thump of cash being loaded into a duffel bag. The whole thing was over in less than 3 minutes. They got away clean. In the days that followed, the adrenaline was overwhelming. Jessica couldn't sleep. Steven kept replaying every second in his head. They had just pulled off a bank robbery, and no one even knew who they were. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No security footage that could lead back to them. They were ghosts. But instead of laying low, they did the opposite. The success of their first job only emboldened them. Jessica felt unstoppable. She started calling themselves the new Bonnie and Clyde, even joking about printing t-shirts. Steven, while more cautious, didn't stop her. He was too deep in it now. Too committed. Over the next 2 months, they hit 3 more banks, each in a different part of the state, each with slightly different tactics. Sometimes Jessica went in alone. Other times Steven did. Once, they used walkie-talkies. Another time, they parked bicycles behind the building for a quick exit through alleyways. Each time, they improved, sharpened, became more efficient, and the money kept coming in. They never stole millions. They didn't need to. Their jobs were precise, between $10,000 and $30,000 each time. Enough to pay for food, rent, gear, and motel rooms under fake names. Enough to keep running. But every time they got away with it, Jessica's confidence surged. She started writing in a notebook, detailing each robbery, each escape, almost like she was building a memoir for someone to read one day. She even sketched the tellers' faces. Steven warned her to stop. He knew the danger of keeping evidence. But Jessica didn't care. She believed deep down that they were writing a legacy. Something people would remember. And then the media got wind of them. It started with a local news report. Unidentified couple suspected in a string of small bank robberies across Ohio. A grainy security camera still showed a woman in a hoodie and baseball cap, face partly obscured, handing a note to a visibly nervous bank teller. The headline was cautious, but the tone was intrigued. Not your average criminals. Not your average case. That same week, another news outlet picked up the story, this time calling them the lovers on the run. And just like that, the media spun a new narrative. And love, armed and dangerous. A modern-day Bonnie and Clyde. Jessica was thrilled. She cut out newspaper clippings and taped them to the inside of her journal. "They're talking about us," she said one night as she tossed a headline onto the motel bed. Steven wasn't so amused. To him, every mention meant risk. Exposure. A ticking clock. But the attention only fueled Jessica's fire. She leaned into the myth. Started dressing the part more deliberately, vintage jackets, red lipstick, scarves that fluttered in the wind. When they weren't robbing banks, they were taking Polaroids in the desert, posing like outlaws. She wanted to be remembered. And yet, beneath the thrill, cracks were starting to form. They had been on the run for nearly 3 months now. Changing towns constantly. Living out of duffel bags. Avoiding cameras. Using burner phones that were tossed every week. The pressure of constant vigilance was wearing Steven down. He barely slept. He was growing paranoid, checking license plates, watching hotel staff too closely, scanning rooms for hidden cameras that probably weren't even there. Jessica noticed. And for the first time, their dynamic began to shift. She had been the one to lure him into this world. But now, Steven was the one questioning everything. He started talking about quitting, about disappearing completely, ditching the disguises, cutting ties, maybe even fleeing the country. Mexico, he said. Or Canada. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere where no one cared who you were or what you'd done. But Jessica didn't want quiet. She wanted legacy. Their 5th robbery happened in broad daylight. A bigger bank, more customers, and this time a security guard. The plan was simple. Go in. Hand the note. Get the cash. Get out. Same as always. But halfway through the job, something went wrong. The guard noticed Steven acting strangely, hand hidden inside his coat, eyes darting around. The guard approached, not aggressive, just suspicious. Jessica saw it from the counter. She had a split second to decide. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small revolver. Not to use it, just to show it. To scare him. She waved it just slightly, enough to make him back off. It worked. He hesitated. Jessica grabbed the bag of money, yelled at Steven, and they ran. Out the side door. Through the alley. Into the beat-up Dodge they'd stolen 2 nights before. But now, things were different. A weapon had been brandished. No one had been hurt, not yet, but it changed the stakes entirely. The FBI got involved. The case crossed state lines. And now, the charges would go beyond robbery. They were officially armed and dangerous fugitives. And Jessica couldn't stop smiling. She felt invincible, more alive than ever. But Steven? He knew the walls were closing in. In the weeks following the armed robbery, everything shifted. The media coverage exploded. Local outlets gave way to national headlines. Young couple terrorizing Midwest banks, modern Bonnie and Clyde evade capture again, romantic crime spree leaves FBI baffled. Jessica had become a symbol. The press painted her as both dangerous and oddly alluring, and she loved every second of it. She kept every article, every blurry security photo, every whisper of their myth growing. But fame, even infamy, has a price. By now, authorities had a working theory, a pattern of hit-and-run robberies across 3 states, always carried out with calculated timing, always with minimal evidence left behind. But now that a weapon had been flashed, they could justify doubling down. More agents. More resources. Tips flooding in from every corner of the country. Steven noticed the change immediately. They couldn't gas up the car without feeling watched. Couldn't check into motels without showing fake IDs. Couldn't breathe without wondering if someone had recognized them. And while Jessica thrived on the danger, Steven was unraveling. They began fighting more. Tension simmered between the long silences and whispered arguments in the back seat of a stolen car. Steven wanted to leave, not just leave town, but leave it all. "We have enough," he'd argue. "We could disappear. Start fresh. We don't need another hit." But Jessica wouldn't hear it. She didn't just want money. She wanted the story to last. She wanted them to be legends. By late August, they had relocated to Illinois, living out of a rented cabin in a wooded area, paid for in cash. Steven used binoculars to scan the roads. Jessica took long walks alone, pretending she was a character in a film about herself. But they were being watched. Federal agents had begun triangulating the robberies based on patterns, entry routes, stolen car registrations, ATM surveillance, even gas station receipts. One particular clue finally cracked the case wide open. A gas station employee remembered a young woman paying in crumpled $20 bills, hands trembling slightly, and a beat-up Dodge parked just out of frame. The FBI ran plate numbers from stolen vehicles reported in the area and got a hit. The cabin wasn't just under suspicion. It was surrounded. On a gray September morning, just before sunrise, agents moved in. Quietly. Methodically. A SWAT van blocked the dirt road entrance. Sharpshooters moved into position. The air felt electric, like a storm was about to hit. Jessica was still asleep when Steven peeked out the window and saw movement in the trees. His heart stopped. He shook her awake, panic in his voice for the first time since this all began. "Jess, we have to go. Now." She didn't argue. Didn't ask why. Just grabbed the bag, the gun, the keys. They bolted out the back door into the woods, thinking they could outrun the agents, that maybe, just maybe, one more escape was still possible. But they didn't make it far. Steven tripped over an exposed root. Jessica tried to pull him up, but the voices were getting louder. The woods were echoing with footsteps, shouting, the unmistakable snap of twigs under boots. A spotlight hit them through the trees. They froze. "Hands where we can see them." Jessica looked at Steven. He looked back at her. For a second, she considered running anyway. Alone. Into the trees. But she didn't. Slowly, silently, they both raised their hands. Their story was over. The arrest of Jessica and Steven Reeves hit the media like a thunderclap. News vans parked outside the federal courthouse for days. Reporters jostled for space, shouting questions neither of them would answer. Their mugshots were plastered across every major outlet, framed by bold headlines: "The Love That Robbed Banks," "Modern-Day Outlaws Captured in Illinois," and "Romance, Robbery, and Ruin." The narrative that had once been romanticized turned cold under courtroom lights. Jessica sat quietly through most of the hearings, often glancing at Steven, her expression unreadable. She wore no makeup, no scarves, No vintage jackets, just an orange jumpsuit and shackles that clinked when she moved. The mythology was gone. The legend stripped away. All that remained was the reality: felony charges, federal indictments, and a future neither of them could rewrite. Steven pled guilty early. His lawyers pushed for a deal in exchange for cooperation. Jessica didn't speak to him after that. The bond that had once seemed unbreakable was fractured the moment he chose survival over silence. She didn't blame him out loud, but everyone in the room could feel the frost between them. During her own trial, Jessica stunned the courtroom. When asked why she had done it, why she had chosen this path, why she followed through, she simply said, "Because I loved him. Because I thought this was how we'd be free." There was a silence after that. Heavy. Not dramatic, but haunting. Even the prosecutor paused, as if unsure how to respond. In that one moment, Jessica wasn't a criminal. She was just a girl who had mistaken chaos for freedom. Psychological evaluations later revealed that Jessica exhibited signs of dependent personality disorder, a condition where a person will go to extreme lengths to maintain a relationship, even if it means violating their own values or safety. It explained a lot, but it didn't excuse the crimes. The judge was firm. The robberies weren't petty. Weapons had been involved. People had been traumatized. She had endangered lives, hers, Steven's, and everyone else's. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15. Steven, having cooperated, received a lighter sentence, 10 years, with eligibility for early release. Jessica didn't flinch when the sentence was read. She nodded, stood, and walked out of the courtroom like it was just another scene in a movie she'd watched too many times. In the months that followed, their story lived on. Documentaries were pitched. True crime podcasts debated their psychology. Online forums dissected every detail of their timeline, speculating what could have happened if they'd stopped after the first robbery. They were no longer just people, they were case studies, myths in the making, legends wrapped in caution tape. But behind prison walls, reality settled in. Jessica found herself in a medium-security facility in Kentucky. She kept mostly to herself, spending time in the library, sometimes writing, sometimes staring out the window like she was still imagining escape routes. She received letters, mostly from strangers who romanticized her story. Some sent poetry. Some sent marriage proposals. But she never answered a single one. Years passed. Seasons came and went beyond the barbed wire and concrete walls, but inside prison, time moved differently, slow, repetitive, hollow. Jessica's name slowly faded from headlines, replaced by new scandals, new criminals, new stories to sensationalize. But for Jessica, the silence was almost welcome. In her 11th year of incarceration, she began attending group therapy. Not because anyone forced her, but because the weight of what she'd done had finally settled in. She didn't cry during those sessions. She wasn't looking for pity. But she spoke, and for the first time, she spoke honestly. She talked about the obsession with being remembered, about wanting to escape her ordinary life, about how Steven made her feel like she was finally part of something larger than herself. But mostly, she talked about how quickly the fantasy had turned into a prison even more suffocating than the one she now lived in. Meanwhile, Steven was released after serving 7 years. His sentence had been reduced for good behavior, and he quietly slipped into a halfway house in Indiana. There was no media coverage, no cameras, no interviews. He changed his name, found work at a warehouse, and lived under the radar. It said he never reached out to Jessica. Not even once. And she never tried to contact him either. They had once sworn to be together forever, ride or die, partners in crime and love. But prison has a way of sobering even the deepest illusions. Whatever love had once burned hot between them had long since turned to ash. Jessica was eventually released after serving 15 years. She walked out of the gates in the early morning, holding a small box of personal items. A few books, a journal filled with half-finished entries, and a letter she had written to herself during her first week in prison. She didn't look back. She moved to a halfway house in a small Midwestern town under a new name, part of a reintegration program designed for long-term offenders. She took a job as a kitchen assistant at a retirement home where no one recognized her, or if they did, they didn't say anything. She didn't talk about the past. She didn't correct people when they mispronounced her name. The local library became her favorite place. She'd sit by the window reading fiction, mostly old westerns and crime novels, and sometimes she'd smile at how foolish the characters were, how easy they thought it all would be. She never gave another interview. She never sold her story. There were offers, book deals, film scripts, podcasts, but she declined them all. She didn't want to be remembered anymore. Because in the end, Jessica Reeves realized that being a legend meant nothing if it cost you your freedom, your future, your soul. And that kind of fame, the kind written in headlines and chased by thrill seekers, it always comes with a price. A price too high. And for Jessica, that price had already been paid in full.